Hello, I'm Dr. Katherine Horton. I want to make a very short video about the effect of psychopaths inside organizations. And one of the things that you have to know about psychopaths is that they have certain traits that are very specific to them and that are not shared by the vast majority in the population. We might have maybe small admixtures, small tendencies, but an actual clinical psychopath is somebody who really has, I think it's now being discovered more and more, it is distinct brain structure, distinct brain signature, which is fundamentally different from ours. But the most defining feature of a clinical psychopath is essentially the complete lack of empathy. So in a sense, what they are missing is this sort of glue that holds us all together, this sort of emotional connectedness that you don't have to consciously trigger, it is just inbuilt. So if you see somebody who's suffering, you immediately feel empathy. You will, in a sense, run the simulation in your head what it must be like for them. And you will, to a certain extent, feel their pain and you will emotionally respond to it. So there seems to be this effect whereby we automatically run the simulation, what is it like for another person, and then put ourselves into that position. So it is some sort of higher cognitive simulation or function that we are running, even though we don't really think about it like that. However, for a psychopath, this will just not happen. For us, it's automatic, and it's not just with somebody who's maybe struggling or needs help, but also with pain. So as soon as you see somebody in pain, it is a primordial reaction that you will react, sometimes very adversely, to the fact that they are bleeding, to the fact that they're ill, to the fact that they're very sick. And a psychopath might feel, for example, in terms of illness, have the same sort of aversion and maybe revulsion that he wouldn't get close to somebody who's maybe visibly infected or very, very ill out of fear of being infected. So he might have that sort of impulse, but at the same time, he will not have the other sort of impulse that we have, which is essentially see another person and immediately place ourselves into their position when they feel pain. That is the key ingredient in empathy. And this is also one of the reasons why a psychopath can literally sit through a situation whereby a person is just screaming in agonizing pain. And it's so stressful for everybody who can empathize that they cannot cope. After a while, that will affect them. So maybe screams from pain or actual displays of discomfort or serious unwellness would begin to affect them as if they were feeling it to a certain extent themselves. Meanwhile, a psychopath can sit through it perfectly calmly and never ever run this higher order simulation in their mind of what would it feel like to me. They would literally just look at the situation objectively as if it was just an object to which this is being done. So in a sense, to a psychopath, you smashing up your laptop or someone having had their knee or a body part smashed up in a car crash, it's almost identical. They do not simulate, they will just see that, they might react to it on some primordial level, but not to the same extent that we do. So this is the absolute biggest, and for systems analysis, I think the most defining feature, simply because in systems, the interconnectedness is mathematically so highly important, and how you actually interact with other people. So the interconnectedness really defines the underlying mathematics and will be entirely determined. So the individual nodes do matter, but not as much as the structure of the interconnectedness and how much and what type of information actually flows between individual nodes. So a psychopath in a human organization will act completely differently to a normal person who will empathize and so on. And they will have very different relationships, they will relate to other people differently, they will pass information differently, and most importantly, they will process information differently. And there's some information, for example, these higher order simulations, which they will just not process at all. So in a sense, your feelings are of absolutely no importance to a psychopath, because they're internal to you. It might matter if you behave a certain way, which inconveniences them because of your emotions, but otherwise, your emotions are of no concern whatsoever to a psychopath if you ever work with them. So this is one of the defining features. It's the utter, complete lack of empathy. But then there's also another aspect from psychopaths that we know from psychopaths, which seems to be common to the vast majority of them. And that is an actual drive towards power. I mean, I have heard about and I have also met people who were essentially psychopathic. They could not empathize. They were not autistic. They were psychopathic in the sense that they couldn't empathize, but they did not have this overarching, drive for power. They did not necessarily want to totally control people around them, but those were the outliers. So the typical box standard psychopath will try to control his environment, and that's actually a natural thing to do, because if you don't empathize with other people, it means to a certain level you don't actually take them to be human. So just like you see a laptop being smashed up or a person being smashed up, if you don't empathize, the two are the same. So in terms of how it registers, cognitively, and what your visceral response will be. So therefore, it is to a certain extent fair to say that to psychopath, other human beings are like objects. Not entirely, of course they know that you've got more functionalities than their laptop, but nevertheless, you will be closer in the category of object as for other people. And the same is also true of animals. And this means, as much as you don't really care about what your kettle or what your oven or what your microwave or your laptop or your pencil case thinks, similarly, a psychopath will take you like something to be manipulated, something to be used, just like you are using your kettle and you don't think about its feelings. So have this, I found personally that this sort of model, to keep that in mind, really helps to understand how psychopaths function inside an organization. Because then certain things that might be disconcerting to you or even surprising will be absolutely not surprising at all. Okay, so these are the two elements we need to put in. Total lack of empathy and just a very egocentric focus about themselves, on themselves, because their own emotions are the only ones they actually process. And the other one is this overarching drive for power. Now, if you have an organization, a human organization, if it's fairly small, the probability that one of them will be a psychopath is actually very large. Very small. Very small. And that's because psychopaths are just 1 in 100, roughly, to start with. This is the average statistic. So psychopaths will be 1 in 100, or otherwise expressed as 1%. Sorry, you couldn't see that, so it's 1%. Now with 1%, if you've got a company with maybe 20 people, then the probability that there will be a psychopath is rounds down to 0. But if you've got an organization that has several thousand people, then there will be a certain admixture of psychopaths that occur naturally. So let's now this organigram is just just too small, and I want to keep it simple. So just for the sake of the argument, I'm going to say that just by pure chance, you end up with an organization that happens to have a psychopath. And this psychopath will just enter your organization at some point. You will just recruit one by chance. And I should also say that psychopaths, in their childhood, do notice that they're different from others. But they also learn, like all children do. They learn to integrate and they learn to emulate. So spotting a psychopath is also very, very difficult. I mean, it's easier to do when they can just do whatever the hell they like, because then, like all of us, we'll just live out our nature. And when you first hire people, it's very difficult to actually see who's a psychopath and who isn't. So hiring a psychopath will eventually happen sooner or later. Now, in this sort of situation, a psychopath will be just very, very functional, because he will not really care, spend much time with chit-chat, worrying about what the other people think about him, what their emotions are, because that involves this higher level of simulation, and he will not bother with that. He will focus on his work, and that's that. But also, as we said, the vast majority of psychopaths also have this need to control others. So if you think about the people around you as objects, then it would really grate you if another object is telling you what to do. So in a sense, as much as you wouldn't take, you might use your car, and your car is much more powerful and has got more energy and can drive much faster than you can run, you would never take actual commands from your car, would you? You would say, no, hang on, that thing might be more powerful than me, but I want to control it. And that's the sort of impulse that is quite natural in psychopaths. So eventually, they'll think, hang on, what's this guy doing? He's just an object. Can I be there? Because if I'm there, I can control these other objects. Now literally, I don't think humans are objects, but just for the sake of the argument, that so that you can wrap your head around a worldview that might be completely alien, hopefully, unless it's everybody who's watching this is a psychopath, but that might be totally alien to you. So in a sense, it's like trying to explain to you what the world looks like when you're colorblind, or when you don't have a sense of smell, I'm trying to use bridges that are not exactly true to help you. So imagine you have the psychopath and he thinks, hey, why is this car or this other powerful object telling me what to do? So eventually there will be strive to be promoted, and psychopaths, because they don't really bother about other people's feelings, will be ruthlessly trying to go up, in the organization, and then another person would be hired, and so on. Now, as soon as a psychopath controls an organization, he will start to shape, like any other manager or coordinator, the actual culture of that organization. And one of the most defining features of psychopaths is this utter lack of empathy. So suddenly, as soon as you have a psychopath in leadership, at first it might seem very, very efficient, because he will be just focused on the targets, he will be focused on what to do to get to the next level, to here. Because again, he's in the situation of, why is, the supercar telling me what to do? I should be there. And, ideally, it would be like that in a psychopath's mind. And that's, why they're trying to get higher and higher. But even at this point here, the psychopath might recognize, okay, I have to take some instructions, but he will not really care about what this person feels. So if they can backstab this person and maybe get friends with the boss, they will. So, you also see this sort of effects with psychopaths, that they will try to have some sort of connections with power and network, and just to literally, like a rock climber, hold on to any sort of toehold to pull yourself up and climb up the organization. But as soon as this happens and you've got a psychopath, he will be influencing the culture down here. So after a while, he will not have any time for discussions and meetings about how people feel. If it's too much stress, he will just start driving these people, not caring about their personal problems or any sort of other emotional state. And then overall, the entire team will be run as if this was a group of psychopaths. And the way it would come about is that typically, in my experience, there is a very dominant person who got here because he's dominant, and then in his dominance he will try to imprint his own views on the entire group, because he's the one who's making decisions. And sooner or later, some person would give in, either because they want to be promoted or because they generally are taken in by this, usually very charismatic person. And then they would adopt the views. As soon as this happens, even if this is just a comic diagram, so the coordinator might be in charge of 5 people, not just 2. But I just wanted to keep it simple. And as soon as this happens, you already have, potentially in a meeting, 2 people trying to convince another person. And they will be very, very forceful. The psychopath for sure, because he doesn't care about the emotions of this person. And the other person will also be forceful, because there will be signals sent from the coordinator that it's okay to be forceful, emotions don't matter. And then before you know it, you've got 2 people descending down on the other person and essentially forcing them to behave a certain way. So actually in real life it will unfold gradually. Maybe there would be arguments or altercations, but eventually, and this is what's this sort of observation has been made over and over, eventually a clinical psychopath will influence the organization, and then just like in the previous video with capture, as soon as you do that, you will imprint whatever you do on the structure below, and then you have a little domain, a little psychopathic domain inside your organization. And here the leadership might not know anything about this, because the leadership here doesn't spend much time inside the group interaction, and to them this person looks like any other. Okay, and the boss usually doesn't even look this far down. The boss just looks down to the 2 managers, and that's that. So no one will know that slowly there's a bit of a psychopathic domain growing up inside the organization. And then what happens is that, again, as I said, psychopaths would like to climb higher. So eventually when this person retires, the psychopath will do literally anything it takes to get there. Because what psychopaths like is control. Just as much as you like to control your kettle and your car and your laptop because you think they are just objects, they're for you, a psychopath, in whose view you're also less of a human and more an object, will try to control you. That's just natural. So he or she, typically it is a he for I think biological reasons. So there are more psychopaths than actual male psychopaths than female psychopaths. But anyway, so sooner or later, so that's why we'll say he. You know, there's a certain admixture of female psychopaths as well. But in this case, it's okay to say he. He will be there, and the same thing will happen again. You know, there might be a new hire, even if this hire is external, right? Eventually, the influence will be such that it will be quite psychopathic, or a person from down below gets hired and it gets passed on. And then again, the very macho or dominant or psychopathic manager will then imprint this on the coordinator. And typically it would happen in these meetings when the manager is meeting all the other coordinators. And then if there are certain targets to be met, regardless of people can cope or not, you know, that will be enforced by this psychopath downwards on the two coordinators. And then the coordinators themselves will begin to drive the organization. And before you know it, again, you have a psychopathic domain inside your organization. In a sense, your organization has been captured by the psychopathic worldview. Okay, so this is how, and just like normal capture, psychopaths will have exactly the same thing, the same effect as capture. And the two ingredients that you need, you know, for capture to get worse and worse, is just the pyramidal organization, which is tapering at the top, so fewer and fewer people are controlling more and more resources and more people. That's why capture is getting worse and worse. In a flat hierarchy, it's actually just stays constant, so you've got columns, and it's okay. You know, it at some point it saturates. But in a big pyramid organization, you will have ever larger domains of psychopaths. That's the first ingredient that you need. It's this pyramid structure. The second one is a given, which is that with time here, so time will mean as time is passing by, the people are always migrating to the top. So there's a kind of like an upward flow in terms of the career progression. So overall, there's essentially a big pressure upwards. And that's because in the vast majority of organizations, people get promoted up and not down. So if we had many organizations where people with time would be promoted down, they would start off as a senior manager and become a junior manager, and so on and so on. And essentially then the flow would be inverted, and you would get from the center all the way down. That would be a totally different situation. In those situations, a psychopath that starts off even at the top would have less and less influence. But of course, this is not how it is. So with time, there's an upward pressure. So the flow of people through the organization is to the top. And there will be new entrants here, but overall it's to the top. And these are the two ingredients you need. Just the pyramid organization, actually three ingredients. The pyramid organization, the fact that the career progression is only up, so there's a flow upwards of people. And the third is just the existence of psychopaths. And that's a given. 1% of the population are clinical psychopaths. That's a given. So with these three ingredients, it is already by design inscribed in all our systems, in every single human system that we have, that a certain fraction of them, sooner or later, will have psychopathic domains, or will in fact undergo deep capture by psychopaths, so that they will, from the board level, control an entire section. Or, if it gets to the very top, here, you know, and the boss is a clinical psychopath, it's pretty clear what's going to happen, because bit by bit he's going to enforce his worldview on people. Oh, you know, let's put it there. And then you will have a mostly psychopathic organization where at the top you've got utter ruthlessness. No concern for the feelings of people. People are used as objects. They are just discarded. If they do not perform, they are literally taken out like a cog and replaced by somebody else, who then comes in and has to fit in. So these psychopathic organizations are very, very tough to work in, because your entire humanity is stripped from you, and suddenly you become either an object, like a processing unit, or literally just a tiny cog. Okay, now even if you are not a psychopath and you try to hold out, if the boss is a psychopath and is exerting his influence, then it will become very, very hard, because as always, people who want to impress will latch on to his views and pretend to have the same views, and in these meetings here already, you will suddenly find yourself against the boss backed up by somebody else, and in the meeting where typically only one person speaks up, or maybe you're lucky and you've got one person to speak up for you, and that's already rare, you will be up against, essentially the boss and the sycophant, always. And that just happens in all organizations, because everybody would like to get to the higher salaries, to the top, onwards. So, before you know it, even if you're not yourself psychopathic, you will be forced to comply. And then the same thing again will be moving downwards. And bit by bit, one after the other, every single person will be corrupted or captured or forced to think a certain way. And before you know it, if you walk into an organization like that, you will notice sooner or later, because in my experience, the environment will be highly controlled. So if the psychopath is at the top, the way, these are very personal, my life experience, how to spot a psychopathic organization or how to spot a psychopath, everything will be controlled. So human beings will be controlled. Human beings will be used as minions, as objects. And the way to tell, typically the boss is a male, most psychopaths are male, is, for example, the secretaries. They are not selected based on personal qualities. They are selected on functionality with add-ons. So as much as you can have a car, and then you can have for free maybe add-ons, if you can have those add-ons for free, you would want them. So let's say you buy a really expensive car, and you don't have to pay extra, and you can have that really fancy car in your favorite color. Of course you would go for that. So what would the boss do? He would get, his, for example, secretarial staff based on skills, but also he would not pick them for personality, he would pick them for looks. So then you walk in and literally the secretariat looks like you've just walked into an advert for makeup or something. All the women look absolutely amazingly beautiful because it's a controlled environment. Their personality doesn't matter because the boss doesn't care what they feel or think or what other input they might give. They have to be able to do their job, but they also have to look the part. And because the boss usually doesn't talk to these people, what they can talk to you about is of no importance. They just have to look the part when he walks past them to his office. So that's a very telltale sign, and you will recognize this. And you, of course, the first thing you should think is, that reminds me of a certain bank or a certain hedge fund that I maybe came across. And that's for exactly that reason. That, those sort of very powerful positions where lots of money is involved attract psychopaths, and they will rise to the top, and then they will shape their organization in their image. But it's not just pretty secretaries that are telltale. And by the way, the same applies for women. So trophy wives are also classical psychopaths. But then in my experience, another thing that might actually surprise you is dogs. You can tell by their dogs if they are predisposed to be psychopathic or not. And that's because in my and this is not a how to say, just a one binary decision. If they satisfy this one criterion, then they must be a psychopath. But in my experience, having two dogs, it's quite easy to tell if they've got two dogs, because then just picking two dogs that you might just have picked up somewhere or might have liked, or one day you decide to go somewhere and just get a dog, you would most likely have two different dogs, or they would be slightly different. However, if the dogs both look identical, it's again a controlled environment. It's like coming into your mansion, and there will be two identical stone lions there for perfect symmetry. So when the two dogs are identical, and especially if they're kind of feisty breeds, you know, Dobermans, Great Danes, this sort of stuff, but even two identical black Labradors already signal controlled environment. The person who picked the dogs likes a controlled environment. And typically with the dogs, actually, it's very often the man who picks the dogs, not the woman. It can be different, but you know, in these sort of environments, that's what it is. And then if you see trophy wife, pretty secretaries, and two identical Great Danes, it's very likely a psychopath, in my experience. Simply because for all of these things to come together by chance is actually very rare, you know. So when they have come together, someone accumulated them, and the fact that they felt the need to accumulate them tells them a lot about them. So, okay, this is just a more amusing anecdotes of how to spot a psychopath, but the real telltale sign is how do people in the organization actually behave? Do they spend a lot of time about how they feel about the project, what they think about the project, you know, or what they think their clients feel or think? Because that's also part of being a psychopath. You're not just, you don't just not care about what your own employees think, you also don't care really what your clients think. So you will satisfy the job, but any sort of frilly details you'll be not very sensitive to, simply because since your childhood you never ever were trained to listen to other people's emotions and ponder what other people might think or feel about yourself. And this is why ultimately actually a psychopath for any sort of big organization is not a blessing but a long-term curse, because they are very forceful. Just as much as, you know, your car would start to give you something that you consider nonsense, you'll be very, very impatient. And similarly, a clinical psychopath, if you come as an employee and you don't behave right, or you're throwing him a lot of problems, or you criticize a lot of things, he will just replace you as if you would replace your car when it's just, you know, breaking all the time. And that's it. And then you have to wonder, do you really want to work in an organization like that? I mean, there's the emotional, personal, and the career impacts. But then there are also actual, real, tangible disadvantages that you can show with systems analysis. And that's because at some point, if people do not talk about their emotions are not just touchy-feely things, you know. And I don't just say it callously. I mean, I am a woman. I am, you know, tuned into the emotional side of people as well. But there's actually a mathematical and factual advantage to all these emotions and talking about them, because they contain so much information. And actually emotions, sometimes, just as much as sometimes you've got a gut feeling telling you to do something or not doing something, what it actually is, in real terms, is your entire brain doing all these calculations and these assessments and these processes, and you've got a much bigger subconscious brain doing many more calculations and assessments than you realize, and your conscious brain actually does very, very few. So if you really want to tap into the full big data analysis, essentially into your server farm, as opposed to just a laptop on which you type, you know, your conscious brain is literally just a laptop compared to what your subconscious brain actually does in terms of real calculations, then at some point you have to bring to the fore what you feel about a certain thing, even if you can't consciously put into words why you feel like that, what you like about it or what you don't like about it. And that's basically the difference. And it is a real mathematical effect, simply because if you just stamp it out, and these people are not allowed to say, well, you know what, my gut feeling tells me, I don't really like that client, or I don't really like that company, or, you know, I don't really think we should get into that project, and you can't justify it, and you're stomped down by a boss who says, yes, but come on, we have to meet these targets, you know, what's the deal? And it's just about numbers, 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 and none of these emotions, then he will cut that off. I mean, he himself has got a subconscious brain, he will have his gut feelings, and he will act on them. So psychopaths are not, how to put it, they don't lack the subconscious mind, but they will lack this impulse to get that information out of other people Do you see? Because that can only run over emotions or this wishy-washy stuff that at first seems very inefficient. You know, when people are just sitting there mulling over what they really think and they're not really sure, it takes some time to get it out. So if you're really just about the meeting and how much money can you make, you will cut that out, and you will cut out real, valuable, actual information about your organization, your clients, the market situation, or detailed supplier situations. That you don't have access to. And that's the other thing, it's about information flow. So if the psychopath is at the top, it's for him mathematically impossible to know, absorb, or digest as much as all of his employees here at the different levels. Okay, because the actual productive work sometimes is only done at the bottom, and these people here high up are just paper pushers. But sometimes there will be phone calls here going externally to other suppliers and so on, or doing assessments and so on and so on. So sometimes imagine these higher levels do useful work. Now, for one person to read through, absorb, understand, and then actually think through himself everything that all of these other people are doing. I mean, already in the simple diagram, I've got how many people here, you know? I've got 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14. For one person to digest everything that 14 people did in a week is impossible. Okay? And then these 14 people will do a lot of the processing in their conscious mind and the vast majority of processing in their subconscious mind. And this will be also spotting problems with other colleagues, problems with deadlines. You know, you might have like a gut feeling of, I don't think we'll, manage to meet that deadline because I do know what that colleague is like, and he will not do this or he will do that instead, and all these things that sometimes you're not even admitting to yourself. Okay, so this is it basically. A psychopath initially is highly efficient because he will cut out information and just not process it. So when a psychopath is rising through the ranks, he will not care about the emotions of anybody around him, which makes him very, very efficient to go up with the flow, Super. But when a psychopath is at the top, it will be devastating because he will stop caring about he never cared to start with, about the emotions of his employees. He'll be driven not so much about taking care about the organization below him, because those are objects, And come on, you're also not maintaining your kettle and your iPhone or, all these things to the top standard. You're just using them, and when you don't want them, you just throw them away. And a clinical psychopath will do the same thing with you. So a psychopath is never looking down. He's looking up, how to get to the next level. And when he's at the top, it's about how much money can I get out of this organization. Okay, so then the entire organization below will not be maintained, information will not be processed, and the discussion of emotions and gut feelings and wishy-washy stuff that actually contains valuable information might literally be stamped out. And it will be just a streamlined organization with pretty secretaries on paper, very efficient staff, but otherwise this thing will be dead. It will be literally like a clinical, table that has been disinfected. There will be nothing, and this is very much how these organizations feel. But anyway, so that I can go in greater detail into why psychopaths are actually that destructive. But one of the things I wanted you to take away from this video, now that you've actually built in your mind, this image of a psychopathic organization, is the fact that because we have 1% psychopaths in our society, because we have all these pyramid organizations that taper at the top, and because the only way in an organization is up, you will have, by definition, psychopathic organizations all over the world, everywhere. And capture by psychopaths is built in to the design of our organizations. So do not be surprised if suddenly we have this situation that many psychopaths seem to be running our organizations, because that is a given that will happen. So thank you very much for listening, and I better go and answer those calls.